On the morning of August 13th, 2018, a routine day in Frederick, Colorado, began to shift in a way no one on Saratoga Trail immediately recognized. A scheduled appointment went unattended. Messages remained unread. Calls were not returned. By the early afternoon, officers were standing inside a quiet, orderly family home, where several details did not align with the routines normally observed there. What followed was a rapid sequence of events documented through official reports, digital data, and statements later released by investigators. This audiobook reconstructs those events, chronological, completely fact-based, and without speculation. A pure representation of what has been proven to have happened. At 1:48 a.m. on August 13th, Shanann Watts returned home from a business trip. A friend had driven her from Denver International Airport to the quiet residential neighborhood of Saratoga Trail. The street was dark and still, with only the occasional porch light illuminating the newly built houses. After seeing Shanann enter the home, the friend drove off, unaware that this would be the last confirmed sighting of her. Throughout the early morning hours, there was no outward sign that anything inside the house differed from a typical night. No lights were reported turning on or off. No sounds were noted by neighbors. The property remained dark as the neighborhood transitioned toward dawn. By 8 a.m., the first sign of concern emerged. Shanann had a planned medical appointment that morning. When she did not arrive, her friend attempted to contact her. Calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages remained unread. This was highly uncharacteristic for Shanann, a Syrian who maintained frequent communication with family, friends, and colleagues. Shortly before 1 p.m., after several hours without response, the friend contacted law enforcement and requested a welfare check. Officers from the Frederick Police Department arrived at the property. From the outside, the home showed no immediate indicators of disturbance. The driveway was empty, and the two-story house appeared undisturbed. However, Shanann's vehicle could be seen inside the garage. Officers noted that the car was parked as usual and contained personal belongings, including her purse, something she rarely left behind. After attempts to make contact at the front door, officers reached Shanann's husband, Chris Watts, who stated he was at work and would return home. Upon his arrival, he allowed officers to enter. Inside, the home was clean and orderly with no visible signs of struggle. Yet, several observations raised concern. Shanann's phone was later found inside the house. Her medications were still present, and essential items needed for the couple's two daughters were untouched. Neighbors, observing the police presence, spoke briefly with officers. One mentioned reviewing his surveillance footage, which captured Chris's truck repositioned unusually early that morning. Another commented that Chris seemed more tense than usual. These were not conclusions, merely observations, but they added context to the growing concern. By late afternoon, with no sign of Shanann, 4-year-old Bella, or 3-year-old Celeste, the case was officially treated as a missing person investigation. The situation escalated quickly, involving additional investigative personnel and prompting a search that would continue into the night. As the search began, investigators worked to reconstruct the family's last confirmed activities. Shanann's phone, found inside the residence, became one of the earliest focal points. Officers noted the absence of recent communication, an immediate red flag. For someone who regularly used her phone throughout the day, the silence was inconsistent with her normal patterns. Detectives began collecting statements from those closest to Shanann. Friends provided text messages from the previous days reflecting concerns she had expressed about her marriage. While not evidence of criminal activity, such details were added to the growing background profile of the household. Investigators also reviewed footage from nearby houses equipped with security systems. A neighbor's surveillance camera captured Chris's truck backed into the driveway at approximately 5:27 a.m., with Chris making repeated trips between the house and the vehicle. The behavior differed from his usual morning routine, according to the neighbor, who mentioned that Chris typically parked in the street and left quickly for work. By comparing digital timestamps and recorded movements, investigators formed a preliminary timeline. Shanann returned home around 1:48 a.m. Her last known phone activity occurred shortly after. No outward movement from the house was detected through the early morning. Chris departed for work sometime after 5 a.m., as confirmed by both surveillance footage and statements. No confirmed activity was recorded from Shanann or the children beyond the early hours. While the evidence had not yet established a crime, investigators recognized the disappearance of 3 family members as a high-priority situation, requiring rapid data gathering. In addition to video footage, detectives requested access logs from Chris's employer, Anadarko Petroleum. These records confirmed that he arrived at a designated work site early that morning. Because he worked in a field environment with remote sites and open land, investigators considered these areas relevant. As night fell on August 13th, search efforts expanded. Officers checked nearby parks, open fields, and community areas. Flyers began circulating. The case quickly reached local news stations. With a missing pregnant woman and 2 young children, public interest grew immediately, and authorities prepared for increasing scrutiny. By the morning of August 14th, investigators had gathered enough information to see discrepancies in the accounts provided. The combination of surveillance footage, timeline analysis, and digital inactivity created unanswered questions. First, the timing of Shanann's last known communication in around 2 a.m. left several unaccounted hours before Chris departed for work. Second, the absence of car usage, given her vehicle remained in the garage, contradicted the suggestion that she had taken the children to a friend or left voluntarily. Investigators also noted that the children's essential items, including medication and comfort belongings, had not been taken. For young children, sudden absence without such items was highly unusual. During a follow-up conversation with investigators, Chris stated that he had an emotional conversation with Shanann in the early morning before leaving for work. He mentioned that Shanann planned to take the children to a friend's home. This account did not align with the evidence available inside the residence. Detectives continued gathering digital data. Shanann's smartwatch and phone records provided further clarity. Her device registered minimal movement during the early morning hours and no meaningful activity afterward. Investigators also discovered through interviews that Shanann had been engaged in ongoing discussions about marital difficulties. These were not treated as evidence of a crime, but were part of building a complete background picture. By combining statements with digital records, investigators recognized the need for a more detailed, structured inquiry. The next steps would involve expanded digital forensics, additional interviews, and more direct investigative measures. On August 15th, investigators prepared for a more structured series of interviews with Chris Watts. The information collected during the previous 48 hours, surveillance footage, digital timelines, and the inconsistencies within his statements led them to request a polygraph examination. Chris agreed to participate and arrived voluntarily at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation office. Polygraph tests are not used as definitive proof in court, but they are a valuable investigative tool to test the consistency of a person's account. Before the procedure, Chris sat with examiners and recounted his version of events once more. His statements remained largely unchanged. He said he had left for work early on August 13th after a difficult conversation with Shanann, and he believed she had taken the children to a friend's home. The exam proceeded under standard protocol. Following its completion, the results indicated that his answers did not align with the objective data investigators had already gathered. Based on publicly released information, examiners informed Chris that the results showed significant discrepancies. After the exam, investigators asked Chris to continue the conversation in a nearby interview room. The tone remained professional, but the focus sharpened. Detectives referenced the timeline created from surveillance footage, phone data, and GPS logs. They noted the lack of digital movement from Shanann's devices, the presence of her car in the garage, and the absence of any sign that the children had left the house. For several hours, investigators compared Chris's statements with the documented evidence. During this process, he acknowledged that aspects of his earlier accounts were not accurate. He then provided information that directed law enforcement to a remote oil site operated by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. The mention of a specific location changed the course of the investigation. The site was isolated and accessible primarily to employees. Because Chris worked in the field, he was familiar with the property and its layout. Law enforcement agencies immediately coordinated a response. Teams were sent to secure the site and begin a systematic search. The combination of Chris's statements, GPS data from his work truck, and access logs from Anadarko created a focused search area. What began as a missing person investigation was now transitioning into a recovery operation guided by documented movements and newly disclosed information. The Anadarko Petroleum site, located in rural Weld County, was characterized by wide expanses of open land, oil storage tanks, and work equipment. It was not a place where members of the public typically visited. Employees logged each entry, and site activity was recorded routinely. GPS data confirmed that Chris had arrived there early on the morning of August 13th. Search teams approached the location with a structured plan. The area was secured to prevent contamination of potential evidence. Investigators began systematically documenting each section of the site, comparing real-time observations with the coordinates recorded in the GPS data. Publicly released court documents later confirmed that the remains of Shanann Watts were located in a shallow area of land on the property. Investigators marked the location, photographed the scene, and ensured that all steps adhered to forensic protocol. The remains of Bella and Celeste were located separately within facility structures. Officials did not release this specific details to the public, prioritizing the dignity of the victims and the integrity of the forensic process. The confirmation of the discoveries accelerated the legal transition of the case. The Weld County District Attorney's Office was notified, and the findings were incorporated into the investigative framework already in progress. A chain of evidence was established immediately, ensuring that each step taken at the site was documented for eventual presentation in court. The discovery also brought a clear shift in public communication. The Frederick Police Department, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI provided limited but direct statements confirming that the remains found were believed to be those of Shanann and the children. No additional details were provided at that time. The work at the site continued through the day, with investigators collecting physical evidence, documenting environmental conditions, and reviewing access patterns. Each piece of information contributed to creating a precise picture of the events of August 13th. Chris Watts was taken into custody. The combination of surveillance data, phone and device analysis, workplace access logs, and his own statements formed the basis for the charges that prosecutors would soon file. The transition from search operation to evidence documentation was methodical and grounded exclusively in verifiable facts. Each stage adhered to the standards expected in a case that would soon face national attention and legal scrutiny. Once Chris was in custody, investigators focused on refining the full sequence of events using official records and digital data. This reconstruction would later become central to the prosecution's timeline. The confirmed timeline began with Shanann's return home at approximately 1:48 a.m. Digital records from her phone verified her arrival through passive location data and brief activity shortly after entering the house. From that point forward, there was no further outgoing communication from her device. Between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., the house showed no indication of outward movement. Shanann's phone remained inactive. The children's typical morning routines did not occur. There were no records of the garage door opening, no car leaving the driveway, and no communications from any family member. Shortly after 5 a.m., the timeline shifted. Surveillance footage from the neighbor's camera showed Chris's truck repositioned in the driveway. He made multiple trips between the house and the vehicle. Although the footage did not reveal specific items, the pattern of movement was clear and sustained. The timestamp on the video aligned precisely with the departure time recorded by his employer's system later that morning. By 6 a.m., GPS data confirmed the truck was en route to the oil site. The route taken matched his regular commute, but the early arrival time and duration at the location later became notable elements of the timeline. The reconstruction also included the absence of routine behaviors. Shanann's phone, which she normally carried with her, remained inside the home. The children's medications and belongings were still present. No neighbor reported seeing the children leave the house at any time. Investigators determined that all 3 victims were deceased prior to Chris's departure for work. This conclusion was based on the timing of the last known communications, the inactivity of devices, and his confirmed movements documented through video and GPS. The timeline was further strengthened by digital correspondence collected during the investigation. Text messages from the days before the disappearance documented the household dynamics without adding speculation. They contributed to the factual background used by prosecutors, but the core of the reconstruction remained rooted in measurable data. By compiling movement logs, video timestamps, digital footprints, and official statements, investigators solidified a clear understanding of the early morning hours of August 13th. The timeline was comprehensive, internally consistent, and based solely on documented facts, all essential components for the legal steps that followed. As the investigation progressed into mid-August, it became increasingly clear that digital evidence would play a central role in establishing what had taken place. Devices that tracked location, communication, and daily movement had recorded data that investigators could verify precisely. The case became a clear example of how modern technology can reconstruct events even when eyewitness accounts are limited or absent. Shanann's phone was among the first items analyzed. Her device contained location metadata, message histories, and application activity. Investigators noted that her final outgoing communication occurred shortly after she arrived home. After that point, her phone remained inactive in a way that did not match her usual patterns. She typically sent messages frequently and responded promptly, especially given her ongoing communication with friends and her responsibilities involving work and family. Her smartwatch offered additional data. Health monitoring devices track movement, heart rate, and activity levels, and investigators used this to narrow the time frame in which Shanann ceased moving. While the exact minute was not disclosed publicly, the data helped define a reliable window that corresponded with the early morning hours of August 13th. Chris's phone data also became central to the investigation. Location information showed his movements within the house and during his commute. His text messages and call logs were examined to establish his behavior leading up to the disappearance. Investigators also reviewed deleted or incomplete communication threads when relevant and legally retrievable, comparing timestamps with other known activity. One of the most critical pieces of digital evidence came from the GPS system in Chris's work truck. His employer's fleet vehicles recorded route, speed, and stopping points. This information was cross-referenced with the surveillance footage taken from the neighbor's house at approximately 5:27 a.m. The GPS data confirmed that Chris drove from the residence directly to the Anadarko petroleum site, with no deviations or unexplained stops along the way. The timestamps aligned across all sources: the departure recorded by the surveillance camera, the truck's movement logs, and the access records at the work site. These points formed a continuous documented sequence that played a major role in the eventual legal process. Investigators also reviewed email communications, social media posts, and photos stored on devices, not to draw conclusions beyond the evidence, but to verify the family's last confirmed movements and to establish that there were no indications of voluntary departure by Shanann and the children. Digital forensics teams worked in coordination with physical investigators, ensuring that every digital point corresponded accurately to real-world locations and times. This cross-verification strengthened the timeline and eliminated alternative explanations that could not be supported by the documented evidence. In the absence of witnesses to the events inside the home, the digital trail provided a structured, reliable record. It allowed investigators to reconstruct the early morning hours with clarity and to confirm the sequence of movements that followed. As the case moved toward the legal phase, the completeness of the digital evidence ensured that the timeline rested on measurable facts rather than interpretation. As information about the disappearance and subsequent investigation reached the public, the community of Frederick experienced a level of attention rarely seen in the small Colorado town. The Watts residence, located in a relatively new suburban development, became a point of focus for local and national media outlets. Reporters gathered along the street, filming daily updates as investigators continued their work. Neighbors described the sudden shift from ordinary routines to a neighborhood lined with police vehicles and cameras. Many expressed that the situation felt difficult to grasp, given that the Watts family had been known in the community and their home had never shown any outward indication of disruption. Within days, residents began placing flowers, stuffed animals, and notes near the sidewalk outside the Watts home. These informal memorials grew steadily as more details became known. People from nearby cities visited the area to pay their respects, often in silence, leaving items that represented condolences to the victims and their extended family. Local officials held briefings to address the public and maintain transparency. The Frederick Police Department, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and the Weld County District Attorney's Office each provided updates focused strictly on confirmed information. They avoided speculation and emphasized the importance of allowing the investigation to proceed based on documented facts. At the same time, the case gained widespread national coverage. News programs featured segments outlining the known timeline, and online platforms circulated maps, documents, and official statements. The rapid spread of information created a need for law enforcement to clarify which sources were reliable. Press officers reminded the public that only statements released by official agencies should be considered accurate. Community organizations responded to the events by organizing candlelight vigils. These gatherings were held in public parks and local churches, with participants reflecting on the impact the case had on the town. Some vigils included brief remarks from community leaders, while others focused solely on moments of quiet observation. Advocacy groups used the visibility of the case to raise awareness about domestic violence, communication patterns within families, and the importance of recognizing behavioral warning signs. Their messaging remained general, not case-specific, but the heightened public attention made it easier to distribute resources and encourage community awareness. While the media presence in Frederick eventually diminished, the long-term effect on the community persisted. Many neighbors spoke of the lasting memory of the events and the changes in how they perceived their surroundings. The quiet suburban street had become connected to a nationally recognized investigation, and residents continued to reflect on that shift long after the formal case concluded. With the discovery at the Anadarko site and the rapidly solidifying timeline, the legal process moved forward without delay. On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts appeared in court as prosecutors formally filed charges based entirely on documented evidence collected during the investigation. These included multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with deceased bodies. Each charge reflected findings supported by surveillance records, digital forensics, and statements obtained during interviews. The initial hearings focused on ensuring the procedural framework of the case was complete. Prosecutors outlined how the evidence formed a continuous sequence: Shanann's confirmed arrival home, the cessation of communication, the surveillance footage showing vehicle activity, the GPS logs aligning with the location where the bodies were found, and the absence of any data to support an alternative account. The legal proceedings were closely followed by the public, with daily news reports summarizing the documented developments. As the case advanced, discussions between the defense and the district attorney's office began regarding a potential plea agreement. Under Colorado law at the time, the charges could have resulted in a death penalty request, though the decision to pursue such a sentence typically involved extensive review and input from the victims' families. According to statements later released, Shanann's family supported an agreement that would avoid a trial, citing the emotional toll that extended proceedings would impose. On November 6th, Chris Watts entered a guilty plea to all 9 felony counts. The plea removed the possibility of a capital sentence and ensured that the case would move directly to sentencing without a prolonged trial. Public filings documented the terms of the agreement and affirmed that the plea aligned with the wishes of Shanann's family. The sentencing hearing took place on November 19, 2018. During this session, prosecutors presented a detailed summary of the investigative findings. Using digital evidence, phone records, movement logs, and physical recovery information, they outlined the timeline of events and emphasized the consistency among all verified data sources. Family members spoke about the impact of the loss, focusing on remembrance rather than speculation. Judge Marcelo Kopkow delivered the final sentence: multiple life terms without the possibility of parole, along with additional years for related charges. The sentence ensured that Chris Watts would remain incarcerated permanently. He was initially placed in the Colorado Department of Corrections system before being moved to the Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, where he remains. In the months that followed, the Watts residence underwent foreclosure proceedings. The house remained vacant for an extended period as administrative actions progressed. Public records later documented changes in ownership, though the property continued to draw occasional attention from those familiar with the case. The case also entered broader discussions in law enforcement and academic settings. Investigators noted that the timeline had been constructed using an exceptionally high volume of reliable digital evidence. GPS data, home surveillance, phone records, and smartwatch logs provided a detailed structure that allowed prosecutors to verify events with minimal ambiguity. Training programs in forensic investigation and criminal justice reference the case as an example of how modern technology contributes to solving homicides in the absence of eyewitness accounts. For Shanann's family, the focus shifted toward remembrance and advocacy. Their public statements emphasized support for survivors of domestic violence, awareness of early warning signs, and the importance of community resources. Their comments remained grounded in respect for verified information, avoiding any unnecessary detail that was not part of the official record. The case continued to attract interest due to the extensive documentation available through court filings, investigative records, and press releases. While many true crime cases leave significant gaps in public understanding, the Watts investigation was notable for its clarity. Nearly every major development was supported by digital data, recorded timestamps, or direct confirmation from investigators. For the community of Frederick, the long-term impact remained visible even as daily life returned to its routine rhythm. Residents spoke about the lasting impression of the events and the way the neighborhood had become associated with a nationally recognized case. Some expressed that the experience strengthened their sense of community as they supported one another during and after the investigation.